Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to uh, Happy New Year, first of all, and welcome to the Community for Global Health Equity um, co-production of knowledge for global health equity seminar series. My name is Kasia Cordas. I'm a co-director of the community, and it's a pleasure for me to welcome you here. And to welcome our two guests today. To tell you a little bit about the seminar series, we started in September and have been exploring topics related to the co-production of knowledge. And those topics include understanding deeper what it means to co-produce knowledge and why it is important to both communities as well as universities, and how the involvement of non-academic partners with their lived expertise in their communities and with the problems that they're defining themselves, what that brings to how that can facilitate uptake of evidence in programming and policy. Throughout this series, we're exploring these topics and want to discover how co-produced knowledge can promote health equity for individuals as well as health systems, understand the importance of integrity, rigor, and relevance in the co-production of knowledge, learn how to develop and nurture reciprocal relationships, as well as discuss barriers to engaging in the co-production of knowledge and how to dismantle them. So to help us do this today, we have two wonderful guests, and I will introduce them. They are Dr. Eli Mui and Allison Dehoney. Dr. Mui comes to us from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. She is a transdisciplinary scholar who's dedicated to identifying public health solutions that build on community assets and strengths. And her research focus is to advance health equity through the lens of planning for food systems, transportation, and community development. She is leading a team of researchers and practitioners in Kerala, India, through the Plan Refuge project. It's a multi-country project in the Global South with the aim of mitigating food and health inequities among small-scale farmers experiencing urbanization and climate change pressures. And in the United States, she is evaluating the role of collective efficacy and collaborative governance models to drive policy and food systems change at the local level. Dr. Mui grew up in Bakersfield, California. She holds a bachelor's degree in public health sciences and an MPH in health policy from Yale University. And she served as a marketing and communications officer for the National Collaborative on Childhood Obesity Research in Washington, D.C., before receiving her PhD in human nutrition from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Following her doctoral training, she completed a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship with the Community for Global Health Equity. So we're very happy to welcome her home. It is also my pleasure to introduce Allison Dehoney. She has 2 years of professional service in key areas of executive leadership, project management, and business development. Ms. Dehoney is Executive Director of Urban Fruits and Veggies, LLC, and a nonprofit Buffalo Go Green, Incorporated, which is an urban agriculture organization that has been in operation since 2014. UFG BGG have an urban farm and mobile produce market that service food desert areas and underserved communities. Buffalo Go Green provides access to healthy fruits and vegetables and nutrition education. They sell at local farmers markets weekly from June to October and operate a corporate wellness division where they embed their services into local companies and universities, corporate wellness programs, and offer programming for elementary and high school students where they teach nutrition, education, and farming. Prior to running these two entities, Ms. Dohoney worked as an account executive for 3 companies, growing books of businesses and developing, maintaining client relations. And she opened and ran an all-state insurance agency and a collection and finance agency. Ms. Dohoney holds a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's degree in business management from Medaille College. And she is currently a graduate candidate in certified plant-based chef and culinary RX from Brooksby Cooking School. And I believe she actually completed that program in December of 2020, so no longer a candidate, but actually a graduate. So it is my pleasure to welcome both of you. I'm looking forward to your presentation and your conversation, and please take it away. Oh, and also, I'm sorry, just to the audience, as you will see, we have a chat box available for you, so please feel free to type in your thoughts as our speakers are presenting, and we will also have a Q&A session at the end, and you're welcome to type in your questions too in that format as well. So welcome.
Thank you, Kasia, for the introductions. Thank you to you and Samina for the opportunity to be a part of this panel, and to Jess for helping to organize us this afternoon. I'm really, really excited and honored to be sharing the Zoom stage, if you will, with Allison today. And the focus of our talk will be on bridging community university networks, the hidden impacts of partnership and co-production in food systems planning scholarship and action. First, we'd like to acknowledge several organizations listed here who have provided support and made the work that we'll be talking about today possible. Just as a brief overview of our talk, Allison and I will start by sharing our background stories and motivation for our work in food systems planning and promoting food security and healthy eating. We'll then share the beginnings of our partnership, followed by our efforts and plans in working toward sustainable co-production. Then we'll close with some key takeaways on developing and nurturing co-production and mutually beneficial partnerships. I'll just add that as a junior faculty myself, my hope, and I think it's safe to say, our hope is that sharing how our budding partnership came to be might offer some ideas or useful insights for other researchers or community partners who may be less familiar with co-production or interested in engaging in co-production. So with that, I will hand it over to Allison. Oh, Allison, I think you're on mute.
So sorry. Thank you, Eli.
No problem.
And thank you, Kasia, Jessica, and Samina for helping us to bring this information and be a part of this series of presentations. So I'll start way back in the beginning. Here's just a series of pictures that kind of outline my background. The first picture is a beautiful picture of the island of Trinidad and Tobago, and that is where my mother is from. Next, there is a map of downstate New York. These tiny little towns and villages are located about 60 miles outside of New York City. There's a village named Warwick, which is where my father was born. I was also born there. So my mother left Trinidad to go to nursing school in England, and my father left Warwick to join the Air Force and was stationed in England, and that's where they met and eventually moved back to the United States. We see our planes there representing the Air Force. We were an Air Force family. We moved around. There's a picture of Plattsburgh, New York, the capital, the state seat for Boston, Massachusetts. There's a picture of Okinawa, Japan. There's the star of the state of Texas. and as you can see, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So just some of the places that we lived. Eventually resided in Buffalo. I graduated with an MBA and started a career in commercial insurance. That career spanned about 20 years, and I was definitely interested in making a change. So I was speaking with some city leaders and talking about food insecurity and food deserts in the Buffalo area, and started to do some research about both of those two issues that are prevalent in our community, and decided that that would be where I would begin to make my career change. Next slide, please. So before any of this, before me and my mother and my father, there was a gentleman named Moses Piggery, who was my great uncle. And he served as a Union soldier in the colored infantry during the Civil War. And then when he completed his military service, he purchased some land and became a truck farmer and grew vegetables for market. So I still try to square that in my head that he actually did that all those years ago. And he and I share the same birth month and birthday. Next slide, please. So a bit of the history of urban fruits and veggies in Buffalo Go Green. After spending a lot of time in a corporate setting and doing my research about again, food insecurity and food deserts. And I put the word food deserts here because that is what the research that I was doing talked about. But as we really start to do this work, those of us in the food space ask that we change that term to food apartheid. A food desert implies that it's a natural state of being on our Earth's surface, and there's nothing natural about the situation of food insecurity and lack of access to fresh fruits and vegetables. So we in this food space and who do this work ask that we start to use the word the term food apartheid. So the company and the organization were founded in 2014. We started with our urban farm, our mobile produce market. And at this time, we did not have any partners. Next slide, please. And these are just some pictures of what our property looked like as we were beginning to build our farm. So we were fortunate enough to have lots of students and lots of schools come and help us build the farm. There's a picture of the contractor that we work with who continues to work with us to this day. It would be difficult to do what we do without them. Next slide. And this is just a picture of our mobile produce market, our farmers market, and our urban farm as it looks today. Next slide, please. So although we're growers and distributors, our main focus is on wellness, and it's on wellness because it is such a serious issue in the communities that we serve. And so we work diligently daily to try to make the correlation between how your food is grown, where you purchase your food, the quality of your food, and its direct impact on one's health, which is a message that is not always given. And if it is given, it's not given in a way that is receptive to some of the communities who struggle most with this issue. So here we are part of the Mayor's Summer City Fitness Program with Blue Cross and Blue Shield. And the other pictures are a picture of our fruits and vegetables prescription program that we partner with the community health centers of Buffalo. And we run this program. We've run this program every year for the last 4 years. And what we do is we start the year off with a wellness event and some cooking demonstrations that are interactive, and folks are able to take home with them everything that is demoed at that event. Next slide, please. So this work has called for me to be in several other spaces besides the daily activity of running the business and organization. So I'm currently the chair of the Buffalo and Erie County Food Policy Council. I'm a founding member of Black Farmers United New York State. That coalition works to find other farmers of color and to find out the needs and work to provide solutions for those needs. I'm also part of Black Farmer Fund pilot community. And this community was created because of the continued lack of access to capital by Black farmers and Black food systems business owners. So we're creating a program and a system where those that are deserving but do not meet society's definition of what deserving of capital investment and grant funding means. And we're creating a way to support those businesses and farms with funding and grants. In addition to that, I'm a board member of the Erie County Farm Bureau. Next slide, please. So looking to the future, and we'll talk more about this as the presentation moves on, and why how Eli and I came to work together through the Community Food Systems Grant. This looking to our future, that grant was instrumental in us being able to develop this future and to have this as part of the large vision for the organization. And we'll talk more about that as the presentation goes on. And I will turn it over to Eli.
Thanks, Allison. So I'll just share a little bit about my background story and motivation for doing research on food. And on the left side of your screen, I'm sharing a photo of my mother and father in Oklahoma, where they met in the early 1980s. My father emigrated from Hong Kong soon after the Vietnam War, and my mother emigrated around the same time from South Korea. From Oklahoma, my parents eventually moved to my hometown of Bakersfield, California, where I grew up as the eldest of 3 kids. Bakersfield, for those of you who are not familiar, has a population of about 830,000 people in the larger metro area. And let's just say it's not usually a go-to destination like its neighboring city of Los Angeles, which is just a couple hours south of Bakersfield. But Bakersfield is a significant hub in the country for both agriculture and energy production. And photographed on the right shows something I commonly encountered, which is this interesting juxtaposition of oil wells in the middle of farmland. Now, in the 80s and into the 90s, it was not common for me to really find many other kids who looked like me or came from a family similar to mine. And I remember quite vividly as a child struggling to find where I felt like I belonged. And as I worked through these tensions between my American identity and my Asian identity, at home I often felt I was too American, but outside of home amongst my peers, I was made to feel too Asian or not American enough. So I share that just to say that this feeling of being misplaced or not quite belonging in any one space really urged me to reflect on my own position in this world, beginning from an early age, whether as an Asian American, woman, or female professional. And I believe these lived experiences have really prepared me for the research I do today. Now, I work on food. In addition to the public health benefits of healthy eating, of course, one thing that has always helped to keep me grounded was gathering around the table to share a meal. And food has really been a way for me to connect my history and my story with my present. On the left is a photo of my paternal great-great-grandfather's home in a village in the southeast part of China, where I had the chance to visit about 5 years ago. And I was pleasantly surprised to find that it was surrounded by a vast plain of paddy fields. And similarly, my maternal and paternal grandparents were in the food and restaurant business. And on the right is my maternal grandmother in South Korea in front of her restaurant of over 30 years. So today, food continues to serve as a thread in my public health work that is really motivated by wanting to understand others' position in this world, to question whose health and lives are at stake, and to do my part in helping to lift up voices that have been minimized or excluded. Now, I will say that I think the intensity and degree to which researchers work with community partners can cover the spectrum from community engagement to community-based participatory research to co-production. And over time, I've tried to work toward co-production, for me, meaning community partners have greater control and ownership of the research process. On this slide, I'm sharing just some photographs of my work over the last 10 years. Earlier in my career in New Haven, I worked with residents to administer a community health assessment of the 6 lowest income neighborhoods through a group called the Community Alliance for Research and Engagement. And during my doctoral training in Baltimore at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, I convened a workshop to co-create a conceptual map of the neighborhood food system and to together identify strategies to overcome barriers to healthy food access. And more recently, as Kasia mentioned, I had the opportunity to work with colleagues at CGHE and the UB Food Lab to lead some work in Kerala, India, where we centered our project on advancing the well-being of smallholder farmers who remain at odds with the globalizing food system, urbanization, and climate change. So that wraps up the first part of our talk and offers a little bit of both mine and Allison's background and motivations. And in terms of the beginnings of our partnership, I think both Allison and I share parallels and also complementary experiences that have prepared us with some shared values and a certain level of readiness that you'll hear as a repeated theme throughout our presentation today. And these shared values, I think, that have really enabled us to work together on issues of food equity. So as mentioned, after completing my doctoral training, I was fortunate to join CGHE and the UB Food Lab as a postdoc fellow. And in this position, I had the pleasure of meeting Allison in the context of the Community Food Systems Project. This grant program was developed by United Way of Buffalo in Erie County in 2017 to implement strategies that would promote food equity in the city of Buffalo and the greater Buffalo area. So the UB Food Lab, where I held my position, served as the local evaluation partner, working closely with United Way and the project grantees to inform the design of the program, monitor the program as it unfolded in the Buffalo region, and to evaluate its successes as well as its challenges. And one of the grantees was Buffalo Go Green, which we just heard Allison talk about, which is the nonprofit arm of Allison's Urban Fruits and Veggies. Now, because this was one of my first projects in Buffalo, for me, this was an opportunity to really listen, learn, and begin to build relationships with various organizations working in Buffalo's food system. And at the bottom of the slide are the project goals of this project, which were to foster collaborations within the food security network in the community, improve access to healthy foods, create food-related job opportunities, promote food entrepreneurships, such as business incubators or community kitchens, strengthen food skills, and establish food policy that would support the above efforts or similar initiatives. So with these goals in mind, United Way of Buffalo and Erie County invited organizations to submit full applications to support work on promoting food equity. And following a multi-stage review process, selected the 13 organizations shown in the red bubbles. And these organizations were charged to implement a series of projects over a 2-year period. Just to clarify, this is a very, very simplified version of a social network diagram and does not include all of the networks related to the Community Food Systems project, but I included it to begin to illustrate not only how Allison and I are connected, but I think in terms of the impact of our work, I found it important to really understand how I fit into these broader social networks that existed long before I had arrived. And I think our shared values in these histories and understanding each other's position in the community food system has really better positioned us for success in our partnership. And so from the research and evaluation perspective, I'll just share a bit about the impact of this 2-year community food system project. During the grant period, over 14,000 pounds of food were grown in community gardens, farms, and private gardens. And funding from this project also allowed grantees to scale up aggregation and food retail distribution. In terms of food skills training, this reached over 20,000 unique individuals across Buffalo who received training from food production, food shopping, food preservation, food safety, and reducing food waste. A little over 200 individuals received training in employment and entrepreneurship activities tied to food production, food aggregation and wholesale, food retail, and food service. And finally, thanks in part to the Community Food Systems project, the Food Policy Council of Buffalo and Erie County drafted a food action plan, which Allison will talk about in greater detail next. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Allison.
Thank you, Eli. And I'll just continue to talk about the impact of this community food systems project. But first, I think it's important to just draw everyone's attention to those the goals of the project and how well thought out those goals were and how relevant they were to the community in which these funds were going to go directly to. And I feel like that's such an important thing to point out if folks are considering co-production. So this was Buffalo Go Green's first major grant. And anyone who's aware of how grant funding works with not-for-profits, it's very difficult to get your initial funding because a lot of organizations don't want to be the first one in for fear that the organization will not be successful. So that's the first very important point. And again, this grant was the only and remains the only grant that the Food Policy Council in Buffalo and Erie County has ever received. Until that time, it was very difficult to do the work. It was very difficult to have dedicated and committed council members participate on a consistent basis. And having an influx of funds to focus on a strategic plan and a food action plan gave the council members some direction, something to focus on and say, this is what we're working on, and it's worth my time and it's worth my dedication to focus and see these two plans through. So what this initial funding has done for our organization is it positioned us to purchase additional prior vacant city lots. So in order to go to the city, at least in the way our municipality is set up, you have to have a plan. You have to, they're not just going to sell you tracts of land. Even if you have the money, there has to be a well thought out plan that shows some funds available to implement your plan. So having the funding from this grant allowed us to put a plan together for what we wanted that space to look like. And then we could say to the city, we have X number of dollars to do X, and we're going to continue to fundraise to do Y. In addition to funding, what this receiving this grant did, what was it opened up an entire network of food systems actors in our community. It allowed us to, we had lunches, we had dinners, we had skill shares, we had meetings, and it allowed us to develop relationships organically. We just didn't start working together because we received the grant. We started working together because we kept seeing each other. We kept interacting with each other. We kept learning about each other's organizations, values, goals, and directions. And it allowed us to determine whether or not any of those three things aligned and how we could move forward together. Next slide. So in addition to those kind of maybe obvious or understandable outcomes of this project, there are some hidden impacts. And again, to talk about the Food Policy Council, when we finally got to the time when we started to work on our food action plan, we wanted to make sure that we weren't missing anything, that we were seeing the community in which this food action plan was eventually going to serve. We wanted to make sure we didn't miss anything. So we called on the UB Food Lab to take a look at the plan and help us fill in any gaps. In addition, community partners benefit from the strength and reputation of universities. And the hope there is that positive outcomes from co-production will help department chairs and university leaders encourage co-production research and work. When funding opportunities arise, the strong relationships are already in place, and requests for participation in those projects and grant submissions are bi-directional. This is a shared benefit for the university and the community-based organizations. And lastly, one of the hidden impacts that came out of this is a current project that I'm working with Eli and the UB Food Lab and some other community partners. The outcomes of the fruits and vegetables prescription program have been able to have influences on some of the directions that our current project, Growing Food Policy from the Ground Up, needed. And we were able to impact some of that direction with our current work and past data from that work. And I'll turn it, let's see, back over to Eli.
Thanks, Allison. So in this last part, we'll talk about how we've continued to build on the Community Food Systems Project toward further nurturing sustainable co-production. And the Community Food System Project, as you've heard, was foundational, I think, in introducing me to Allison and to the Buffalo community, which enabled both of us to learn more about the Buffalo context in different ways, which ultimately strengthened our readiness and capacity to engage in co-production on this next project called Growing Food Policy from the Ground Up. So Allison and I took some of these lessons learned to this project and are working along with other collaborators, which you can now see in the green bubbles, including the UB Food Lab, the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, the University of Minnesota, and with community partners in both cities, including the Massachusetts Avenue Project, Urban Fruits and Veggies, and Appetite for Change. So for this project, I'm serving in the role as a co-I, leading one arm of the project, and I've been working closely with Allison and other community partners throughout the entirety of the research process, from proposal writing to project planning to gearing up for recruitment and data collection where we are now. So just to share a little bit more about the goals of this work and to give you a sense for how this is building on our previous work, this is a 5-year project that aims to generate capacity building lessons for local governments by drawing on lessons from both Buffalo and Minneapolis. The first goal is to examine social networks in urban food systems and their role in facilitating food systems level change. The second goal is to identify limitations between urban food systems and local government policy networks, especially those impacting urban growers of color. And the third goal, which should be in green, actually, excuse that error, is to develop methods in engaging urban growers to emerge as leader in local policy networks. So to reinforce the importance of readiness and shared values that Allison and I have touched on, and to further nurture our reciprocal partnerships, our team members of faculty, students, and community partners discussed our shared values, hopes, as well as anticipated challenges for this project. And pictured here is a word cloud of some of the values that came out of this discussion. And so we bring these shared values to our research. And at this point, I'd like to invite Allison to talk about, from her perspective, how these shared values have been brought to bear. Back over to you, Allison.
Thank you, Eli. So yes, the shared values that we find regarding transparency and all documents being on Google Docs, and just in the way that we communicate, from the smallest things such as time and making sure that everyone's time is valued and everyone is involved in when we schedule and what's going to be discussed. So there's a mutual respect, and the respect by the community-based organizations for the knowledge and structure and procedures that academics bring into the community when partnering is mutual by academics and the university, and specifically in this project. Our knowledge, education, skills, and expertise and relationships in the community are respected equally. Next slide, please. So for our particular project that we're speaking of now, co-producing before the inception of the project. So all community partners and university folks were involved in the proposal writing, determining which community partners aligned with this project planning, communication, and again, allowing for the work of community partners to influence what some of the desired outcomes could be for this project and its impact in the community. Next slide. So again, co-production. Oh, this is you, Eli. Back to you.
No worries. So I'll just continue to build on what Allison has shared and detail a little bit more what co-production has looked like in the research process from the academic standpoint. And so, as I mentioned, I am leading the household survey as part of this project. And the household survey is focusing on measuring different metrics of community health and collective agency. And so the entirety of the team, we hold regular team meetings with our community partners. And Allison is one of a group of community partners on this project. And for the household survey, we've worked closely on co-developing the household survey, checking in with our community partners in terms of questions around food security and social networks and what makes sense in this context. And we've also talked about with our community partners pilot testing the household survey, what administration of the household survey should look like, considerations around respondent burden, and also planning for recruitment. And in terms of the more outward facing components of the project, a research faculty at Hopkins, Nina Martin, who also specializes in communication, is working with a local artist in Buffalo, Adrice, at Eat Off Art, to work on co-designing also the communication materials related to the project, including the website and social media. So we're really thinking about all in the entirety of the research process, really making it a co-production. And this brings me to my last point regarding technology, which Allison talked about, and our use of Google Docs and Google Drive, I think has really helped to facilitate transparency in our co-production. And I found it very helpful to utilize this platform that enables everybody access to research meeting agendas, adding agenda items, access to previous meeting minutes, decisions that were made in those meetings, planning documents, etc. And so hopefully that helps to give a little bit of a sense of what the co-production research process has looked like in the case of this project. So in closing, we wanted to transition and wrap up with just a few key insights on developing mutually beneficial partnerships. And the first being that co-production requires readiness, both on the part of researchers and community partners. On the end of the researcher, I think readiness can come from lived experience. I talked about how my upbringing and experiences with feeling misplaced or excluded, how that pushed me to evaluate my position and the position of others in different spaces. But equally important, I think, is to have the training to co-produce in research. I know I have certainly benefited from having Samina as a mentor and the opportunity to watch, to really learn and engage with partners in Buffalo during my postdoc training. That's enabled me to continue to build on these relationships with Allison and other partners in Buffalo. In fact, to give a very specific example, on day one of my postdoc, I participated in a training workshop on race and class that was facilitated by an external organization and involved both research members from the food lab as well as community partners. Allison, did you want to add anything else to the readiness part and right fit in terms of partnership?
So I guess I'd just like to share that sometimes sometimes values do not align, and sometimes readiness is not evident, and that needs to be okay, and that it's important to make sure that partnerships align in value in order to move forward on these projects that sometimes take on a life of their own. And you're gonna need that strong foundation of knowing that you have shared values when things kind of get a little hectic and everybody's grounded in the work. So I think it's important to sometimes say, you know, this is not a good partnership and we need to find, you know, work elsewhere to find those partners that work together. So one of the things that I'd like to just touch on, and I know we're getting close on time, but I wanted to talk about the process and how important research is, and for researchers and universities not to minimize in any way the value of research, both positive and negative. And I'd like to just draw your attention to Harriet Washington's book entitled Medical Apartheid. And in her book, she examines the brutal history of medical experimentation on slaves. And she also goes into talking about how medical doctors and researchers participated and were able to bring justification to some of the brutality that took place. And I'll just give you a few examples. Several doctors wrote their thesis papers on the brutality, and they wrote papers on fraudulent illnesses of slaves. There was a time when whipping slaves became a form of medicine for malingering slaves. And there are just so many examples in this book of how research was able to justify some of the brutality that slaves endured, because they were able to say, scholars have studied this and they've written papers, and so we must be correct in our actions. So I say all that to say that when a community isn't involved in a strategic and proper way, putting out research can sometimes be harmful to communities where harm wasn't the intention. So I just caution as researchers to be cognizant of that.
And then finally, that leads us to the last takeaway, number 3. With inclusive processes, co-production can enhance both the visible and the more hidden impacts of research. And in the Community Food System Project, for example, in my view, partnership and co-production really facilitated bi-directional learning in terms of developing an evaluation that would be useful for United Way and the 13 participating grantees, as well as building the capacity of participating organizations to engage with other actors in the community food system, which we heard Allison talk about. And ultimately, in the end, I think the reach and impact of this work went beyond the scope of the project, for example, with regard to the Food Action Plan. And then the last note I'd make is that I think co-producing knowledge across the academic, research, and community life boundaries can really enable researchers to reframe the problem question, which can then lead to different kinds of solutions. For example, if a researcher enters a community with a more deficit-based framework, for example, a neighborhood is lacking healthy foods, or a community has low demand for healthy foods, I think this lends itself to a very different way of engaging with the community and can lead to identifying solutions for a community. Whereas in co-production, researchers are more likely to apply an asset-based framework, and solutions are more likely to be identified with community partners. And with that, I wanted to also hand it back to Allison, which I think has some closing remarks for us.
Yeah, so along the lines of speaking about some of the challenges or some of the negative impacts that research can have on communities, and folks might say, well, Harriet Washington's book examined a time that was so long ago. So we can, think of the really documented things that happened, such as, the tremendous amount of experimentation on Black women, Henrietta Lacks, and the Tuskegee experiment. But I wanted to try to get some experience separate from mine in my community and closer in time. So I spoke with a very respected community member in the city of Buffalo who's been working on food systems for a long time now, to just find out what her experience has been with universities working with the community. And her recollection of her first sight of colleges and universities in the community was when they started recruiting Black and brown folks who were going to be able to receive funding from the state and federal, actually go to school. So again, it was not the ideal situation of the universities and colleges working in communities. So I show that progression to say that I feel like I am very fortunate, because my experience working with colleges and universities has been about 98% positive. And why has that been? Because my very first experience working with the University of Buffalo in this food space was with UB for Food Lab and Dr. Samina Raja and all the team at the Food Lab. Extremely positive experience. Working with the Masters in Public Health Department and the Veggie Van study, extremely positive experience. Working with Cornell Cooperative Extension and their Small Farms program, very positive experience. So I'm hoping that this co-production model and partnering with community partners that have shared values and where readiness is evident is going to be a model and set the stage for how we work together in the future to serve the same communities that we want to help in an impactful way.
Thanks, Allison. And I think on that note,
thank you, Eli.
we can open it up for Q&A.
Okay.
Thank you, both of you. This is Samina Raja. It's a pleasure to listen to both of you, and I am monitoring the chat and questions and answers. We'll give people a couple of minutes to ask, and then I have some questions for both of you. The first question has rolled in from Dr. Claire Cameron, who's a colleague here at UB, and she is thanking both of you and asking as follows. I'm curious if an assessment tool for faculty members' readiness for co-production could be useful. I'm reading out the questions in the event that somebody has dialed in using only their phone and are unable to see the chat. Thank you for the question, Claire. So I'll turn it over to both of you, either of you who would like to address Claire's question.
I'll start, but Eli, please join me. I think that an assessment would be great, especially if there are departments that don't have a lot of experience. The one thing I would caution is that an assessment tool is great, but there has to be the desire and the understanding of the community from the folks in that department. It's not easy to get community buy-in if the community doesn't know you. So that I think would be something to take into consideration, even if you had the assessment today.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And to build on that, say that the readiness of the faculty needs to be there. And as Allison talked about in the community, but I think in thinking about the assessment tool itself, that itself should be something that is a result of co-production too.
Can you say more about that latter part, Eli?
I think that it's easy to fall into the habit, I think, of developing an assessment tool for evaluation purposes, but the metrics that are used and what is proper readiness for co-production, there should be input from both faculty and community partners in developing that tool.
Thank you. I'll raise the next question. In the meantime, I invite participants on the call, and we have quite a few, to drop in their questions. I was really struck by both of your journeys separately, and then how it intertwined in Buffalo. Eli, you talked quite a bit about your training, which was very much in public health, doing quite a bit of work on behavior, nutrition, diet, and then looking to broaden your training into the systemic change. And in some ways, Allison, I hear the same threads in your comment too, the initial work on food deserts, on diets, and then working on policy. So I'm wondering what you might say to, first, I'm going to pose a question to Eli. I'm wondering what you might say, Eli, to faculty and researchers in the traditional field of public health about why you chose both of those facets. You've certainly not given up on thinking about diet change and individual behavior, but you have supplemented it. Why is that important? And then it's the same question that I have for Allison. Say more about what prompted you to shift from thinking not just about, say, food deserts to thinking about food apartheid. That's a pretty fantastic example. I didn't set you up to say that, but that I think is a great example. So from a research point of view, why food apartheid, not food desert, Eli? And Allison, same for you.
So for me, I think I chose to make that shift because I realized that food behaviors don't happen in a silo. There are, and in public health, we are talking much more now about social determinants of health and really understanding the interconnection between systems. And I think those systems are also not by accident. Those systems are by design. So it's really important to, if we in public health are trying to affect behavior change, have to understand who designed those systems and how those decisions were made, and ensure that those who were excluded from those decision-making processes have a seat at the table in reshaping the food system and the other systems that are connected to it.
So I guess for myself, and I am included in that education process regarding food deserts and food apartheid, because as I stated initially, when I was doing my research several years ago, there was never any mention of food apartheid. It was all about food deserts. And so what happens a lot in communities that are economically depressed and in communities of color is that we get these labels and we take them and we do not question them. We just say, oh, I live in a food desert, without taking time to say, but a food desert is a part of our earth. It's a natural, like we have oceans and rivers and lakes, we have deserts, and it fits in with our ecosystem the way it should. So I don't live in a place like that. I live in a place where folks purposely do not build grocery stores. I live in a place where if you do not have a vehicle, you are going to struggle to put groceries on the table for you and your family. And like Eli said, that is by design. So it's important. And this is also where universities and colleges can be of great assistance to help communities understand that education process and explain and give data and research as to why you do not live in a food desert. You live in a food apartheid, either zip code or neighborhood or area. And I think the more that we co-produce and work together, it opens up for communities to be able to question, and they have a safe place to go to say, I was thinking about this, or I heard about this. Can you help me with this?
Thank you. Very insightful. We have a question from Dr. Cordes, who's a colleague that both of you know. She's thanking you for your experiences and sharing your experiences and lessons openly. She notes that there are many partners in your network, which is a great asset. She wonders if you could talk about how you all keep track of the potentially changing needs and priorities within this large network and make sure that the work moves forward. So you can, either one of you can take a stab at that.
I'll start, Eli, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it, please, Allison.
It's a great question. It's very overwhelming. And when I think about it, honestly, if I knew that this was as big an undertaking as it is, I probably would never have done it. So it's difficult. However, what's rising to the surface and what is really great is that while we're all functioning in this food space, for example, African Heritage Co-op, they do, while our work is connected, they do a few things and they do them specifically and they do them well. Grassroots Gardens, yes, our work is connected, but they do a few things specifically and they do them well. And so what's happening, which I think is an amazing thing, and it's just so good for everyone, is we're starting to lean on each other for those areas that each organization has a great skill set and has seemed to have mastered whatever it is that we need for our partnerships. And we're coming together and we're trying to solve our collective problems in our community together by partnering this way. But yes, it is difficult to keep track of it. And I can't say that there's any one entity keeping track, but somehow we know who to call when we need a skill set or a person or whatever it is we're looking for to serve the community.
Yeah, on my end, I'll be quite honest, I haven't quite figured it out from from the research standpoint. But what I can say is that I think that the network is our strength. And like Allison said, the more that we strengthen and build on these relationships, we're able to lean on each other's strengths. And I've really been fortunate in continuing to work with this group and learn from the infrastructure that's slowly building, so that if one person or another person in the network has to go focus attention somewhere else, there will be somebody else who can help with a given task. So it is something that I'm still learning, but as Dr. Cordes points out, the greatest asset is the network and the strengths in the network.
Thank you, Eli. Thank you, Allison. A question from Dr. Rajan, who's asking, since academics and community partners have different skills, expertise, and experiences, what challenges did you face in learning about the other partners' approach? How much of an obstacle is this to co-production?
I can take that. I can start there. One of the things that I found challenging was the need to meet to gather data. And sometimes those questions seem repetitive. And as I have broadened my work with academics and I understand greater the pockets of data that they may be focusing on and why that question is asked that way for that set of data, and then they ask the question again for another set of data in a different way, it now makes sense. But initially it is challenging, and it's sometimes kind of like, well, we're going to spend 2 whole hours talking about data. And so when you realize the benefit of it for your organization and how it can have a positive impact on your work and how it can narrow your focus, it becomes extremely valuable. So it's just, I think, getting a little bit over that initial understanding of how researchers think and work.
I think for me, one of the challenges has been around timing and the expectations of what goals researchers should be meeting versus community partners, and aligning the timing of those. And so I think in working towards overcoming that challenge, it's learning to find a common ground. And I think that's where the shared values really are valuable. If you and your community partners are working toward the shared goal, I think that it really facilitates more flexibility in the scheduling and the needs of the researcher as well as the community partner, and making sure that the two are working together in a way that's mutually beneficial.
And I think that's such a good point, Eli, because there has to be trust there. Like, I have to trust that when you say, Allison, we need to schedule some time to do X, that it's relevant and important, and you're not just like kind of checking a box. Like, your demand on my time is to get the outcome that we have agreed we both want. And again, that goes back to the shared values and the trust and the relationships.
Thank you both. I think you have just co-produced the next journal article, but we can talk about that later. There's a question, I believe, that's been shared by Camille Brown, who's the manager of the UB Food Lab, but she might also be presenting it on behalf of other teammates. They would like to hear from you. How might co-production be a better research tool if one is interested in policy change?
I'll take a try at this, Allison, and then please chime in. I think policy change is intended to serve the public and people at the end of the day. And research is often used to inform policy change. So the more that we are able to engage in co-production in the research process, I think it will add authenticity and add value to the research that will ultimately inform the policy that will affect communities that they're intended to serve.
And I think we have a good example of that. And Samina, I hope you don't mind me sharing, but there's a team across the state that's working with the Commissioner of Agriculture to present a plan to our governor to have a more diverse and inclusive agriculture industry. And, you know, whether folks agree or not, when you have a professor from the University of Buffalo supporting a large group of community-based organizations looking to affect policy change, it strengthens our ability to get the message across that we need this policy change. And so we're grateful when we have that extra amount of support to further and champion what we're trying to get across.
Thank you. We have a question from our colleague at the Community for Global Health Equity, Jessica Skates. She's asking, can you speak to what you call bidirectional learning? What methods have you employed or others have employed to ensure bidirectional learning has occurred, and to ensure that what you are measuring as learned is relevant and important to both university and community partners? And I will disclose that Jessica is training in educational policy, so therefore that's likely where her question is rooted. So say more about bidirectional learning, please.
I think I was the one that used that term, so I will go ahead and take that question. In terms of bidirectional learning, the methods that we've used, I think, for one, the transparency in our communication with our community partners and with our research team, just sharing what the research team is thinking and planning for, hearing from community partners, and creating the space where community partners can push back on what our research plans are, whether it's around a survey tool or recruitment planning or what have you. I think that's enabled this bidirectional learning in some sense, and that we can pivot and shift things in a way that is more relevant and meaningful for our community partners. That was one approach that we'd used with the Community Food Systems Project, and that working closely with United Way and with the 13 grantees and understanding what should be evaluated, what is successful work in promoting food equity. That was something that was bidirectional. And as we heard from Allison, as a result of that project, also there was capacity building and learning among the 13 organizations about networks and relationships that could be developed across the 13 organizations and beyond with other actors in the food system. To the second question about to ensure what we're measuring is learned, I think that there's opportunity to really think more about what those specific metrics are, which I think circles back to one of our first questions in the discussion and how we're measuring successful co-production and co-learning. That's definitely an area where I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to work together on.
And specifically, one of the hidden impacts of our co-production was that when there's opportunity for new projects and grant funding, that the requests are bi-directional. Sometimes they are a request from a community partner, and sometimes it's a request from the university to participate and further partner work together and co-produce.
Thank you. I think Jessica has just given us an idea for a future research, co-produced research project. So this is great. The next question is from Kristen Tallis. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Kristen is from the Center for American Indian Health and has a question about how involved the Native or Indigenous tribes were in the process. I'm not sure which particular project Kristen is referring to, but either you could respond to that how you wish, please.
So I can respond, Eli, if you don't mind, on the Food Policy Council side. It was very important that while we unfortunately don't have a Native American person on our Food Policy Council, but we needed to recognize the Haudenosaunee land that we're on. We needed to recognize past indiscretions and discrimination and brutality on Native people, to Native peoples. And so even though we didn't have a person to represent that, when you are, I feel like, you know, when you, going back to Eli's personal history, when you have experienced discrimination or not fitting in, sometimes, not always, but sometimes you are more cognizant to those situations, even if they don't directly impact you, but you know that they existed and they're akin to some of what your ancestors or, you know, people currently go through. So we need more of that, but we did try to acknowledge and recognize that in our food action plan, which is our public facing document. So not only did we recognize it on our council and talk about it, we wanted it in our public facing document.
Eli, would you like to add?
No, that was great. Thanks, Allison.
I'm not 100% sure I answered the question directly, but I think that was the best that way to respond.
Thank you. I don't see additional questions filtering in, so I have a few that I was holding back, which I would like to ask if it's okay. Eli, you're at a particular juncture in your career, and I'm looking at who is on the call right now. We have attendees who are faculty, and we have community partners from our network dialed in as well. So for Eli, I'm wondering what advice you would give to early career faculty on how to step into co-production work while attending to the demands of the rigor of being on tenure track. As faculty who are on tenure track are aware, there is a certain rubric, certain kinds of demands on faculty. So what are some strategies that you use so that you can engage in co-production?
Yeah, I think one strategy when entering a new space and wanting to engage in co-production, and I touched on this a little bit earlier in the talk. For me, it was, for example, coming to Buffalo was really important to learn about the Buffalo community and spend time in building some of those relationships and understand the existing relationships in the community. So, and then I think, as Allison talked about, identifying those shared values and being okay with walking away when those values do not align, that is okay. I think it's worse to try to force co-production when it's not fitting. It's better to acknowledge and just be very transparent about that. I'd say those are two strategies that I'm using in my early faculty career. And just really approaching it as building relationships. This is what co-production is at the end of the day. And I think there's a lot of value in just thinking about the relationships that I would like to have, that a junior faculty would like to have with potential community partners.
Thank you, Eli. For Allison, the question is for community partners in any city or region who wish to work, maybe generally they may not wish to work with universities, but if they wish to work with universities in a way that is beneficial to them or to all parties involved, what are some questions you think about before entering a co-production relationship? What advice would you have for a community organization on what to watch out for, what to think about? What are some questions that cross your mind?
So, yeah, that's a really good question. So here locally, and if anyone was able to listen to Dr. Resnick's initial presentation in our series, he gave a really good example about the University of Arizona and how they were not transparent with the tribe that they were working with. And it was a horrible situation. In any case, a lawsuit was brought, the tribe prevailed and vowed to never work with the university again. So bringing that locally, like I talked about, I haven't experienced any adverse situations working with universities. However, I know they exist because I know what I hear in the community. So, I did bring that up with some of the folks in the Masters of Public Health department, and they were great about it. They said, yeah, we know that we have a lot of ground to make up for. And so we don't want to repeat past mistakes. They didn't try to sugarcoat it, and they didn't try to deny it. So my advice would be, if you know of situations where folks say, no, I'm not working with that university, this is what happened, I would be open about it and say, your reputation in the community is tarnished because of XYZ. And how do I know that this experience isn't going to be different? And that answer should be satisfactory to you in a way that you feel like you want to move forward, because the project that you're considering is very important for the community or your work. So that would be my advice. Do I have some assessment or tool that I use? Absolutely not. But I think asking the questions and evaluating how they're received and the responses is the best that most community partners could do.
I think I would also add, from the academic perspective, given, we talked about competing timelines and sort of challenges around that. And, at least I've experienced having moved from different spaces as well, which makes it difficult to establish longer term relationships. And I think that it's important to be, again, just very transparent and communicative about that. But also, if one is entering a co-production space, having a follow-up plan and plans for next step, should a faculty have to step away for whatever reason, that is okay. And that is the respectful way, I think, of handling a co-production relationship.
I would agree with that, Eli, with regards to the timeline, because if community-based organizations can see the objective, the goal, and its impact on the community or what they're trying to achieve, and if that lines up, that might be a good place to start to say, you know what, I do want to take this chance if they feel like they are taking a chance, and work with this university because our outcomes align. We want the same thing, and I can see a clear path and timeline to reaching those goals.
Thank you for that. There's a comment that I want to follow up in the chat, which is from Kristen Tallis, who I don't know whether she is in or he is in Buffalo, or I don't know their pronoun either. I don't know where they are, but they are acknowledging the paradigm shift away from food deserts and signaling that that is a true representation. So I want to follow up to that, to share with both Kristen and the broader community in Buffalo that Allison and Eli both made references to the network in Buffalo. And for those who are not familiar with Buffalo, one of the reasons why we are lucky is because Eli and Allison both are contributing and participating members of what is called the Buffalo Food Equity Network, which does include Indigenous representation as well. There's a question from Camille. She's thanking you both and saying that the information is inspiring. She wants to know about power in co-production. A key aspect of co-production involves negotiation of power, interrogating who has power and who doesn't have power in the act of co-producing, asking how can one let go of power and empower. Not everyone comes to the table with the same amount or degree of power or awareness that they have or can change agency. Similarly, not everyone has access to the same knowledge in the same way. Not everyone can access the shared folder, follow schedules, join the Zoom meetings, and understand the value of data. I'm wondering what are some strategies that you have to embrace, this negotiation of power, particularly in governance, decision-making, and conflict resolution, which involve the negotiation of power.
Great question. Thank you, Camille. Allison, would you like to go or shall I kick us off?
Okay, I'll start. So, because it is a very, very important question. So I think if the initial relationships or the initial meetings have that feeling where there is a hierarchy of power, I think you're probably going to have problems right away. I think it's just natural that community-based organizations feel like, oh my goodness, the big university. And that's not a bad thing. It's just that universities yield power. And a lot of times it's warranted and sometimes it isn't. So let's just go with this power is warranted and this is a good project. But I think it's incumbent upon the university, since they, would yield that power, to make the community-based organization and those folks involved understand that there's equal footing with regards to power, and your voice is valued and your knowledge. We may have academic power, but you have community power. And if we're going to achieve our objectives, those two levels of power have to be equal. So I would say if you're not getting that initially, or the university is not willing to operate in that way, that you might have challenges.
Yeah, I think to build on that, in the research space, in terms of thinking about power and the balance of power, I think it's about the culture and the tone that a researcher sets with the team. And like I mentioned, my first day in my postdoc training, we had a workshop on race and class and what these power dimensions mean in the context of working with community partners. Similar to the ways in which community partners come to the table with different degrees of experiences and knowledge, it's the same, I think, on the academic side in terms of readiness and experience and working with community organizations. And so I think that a strategy is to create space and opportunities for building capacity among faculty to really, as Allison said, value community voices equally in the same way as research is valued.
Thank you very much. We have had a fantastic conversation and some great questions. And I could not think of a better way to close the conversation on co-production than to discuss this power differential and how one might do that. And Eli, your comments and also Allison's about the culture and creating a space for that conversation, I think is a reminder not just for universities, but also the organizations that fund universities, like the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation, to understand that co-produced research needs to be preceded by that research relationship building that you both are describing. Without that, it would be really difficult to co-produce knowledge for those kinds of projects that are supported by NIH, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and other organizations. We have a lot to digest. Thank you both for your time and really detailing for us lessons. And I am excited about continuing to see where your work goes. And we look forward to having you back to perhaps share with us new lessons after you are well into your new project. Thank you both, and thank you everyone for attending. I wanna remind folks that this talk is video recorded and will be available on our website. And this particular lecture is part of a series that we will continue. We invite you back to the next set, and the series will conclude with a conversation about what we learned through the series itself. And we of course welcome you back to that. A link to the series is available in the chat for all of you. And thank you for making time in the evening to be here. Be safe and be healthy. Goodbye.